The words hit the room like a rifle shot. Dexter Quinn stood at the head of the long pine table inside the Quinn Ranch house, his jaw set like iron, his dark eyes burning with something that none of his brothers had ever seen in them before. Not fury exactly, though fury was certainly present. Not desperation, though that was there too. It was something fiercer and more dangerous than either of those things. It was conviction. It was the kind of certainty that a man arrives at only after he has wrestled with his own soul for a very long time, and finally stopped pretending the answer could be anything other than what it is. His older brother Randall had just finished laying out the plan. The plan that would ruin everything. The plan that would take what did not belong to them and dress the theft up in legal language and call it business. And Dexter had listened to every word of it with his hands flat on the table and his teeth clenched so hard his jaw ached. And when Randall finished speaking and looked around at the assembled Quinn brothers with that satisfied expression of a man who believes he has solved every problem neatly, Dexter opened his mouth, and he spoke the words that would change everything. She works this valley honestly, and she deserves every acre she has. The silence that followed those 9 words was absolute. Even the fire in the stone hearth seemed to hold its breath. Randall stared at him. Their youngest brother Cole stared at him. Their middle brother Warren shifted in his chair with the discomfort of a man who secretly agrees with something he does not want to agree with. "You would side with her over your own blood," Randall said, and his voice was very quiet, which meant he was very angry. "I am not siding against our blood," Dexter said. "I am telling you what is true and what is right. And if you cannot see the difference between those two things and a scheme to steal land from a woman who has broken her back to earn it, then one of us has lost his way, and it is not me." Randall's chair scraped back. He was on his feet. His face had gone the particular shade of red that the Quinn family had learned to read as a warning signal since childhood. "That woman," Randall said, and the contempt in those 2 words was a physical thing, "has been a thorn in this family's side since the day she arrived in this valley. She has refused every fair offer we have made." "Every offer you made was not fair," Dexter said. "Not one of them, and you know it." That was the moment. That was the fault line that cracked open beneath the Quinn family, and would take a very long time to heal. But before we understand what happened next in that smoky ranch house on a bitter October night in 1882, we need to go back. We need to go back to the beginning of how Winifred Barrett came to the Cimarron Valley in the first place, and how Dexter Quinn came to be a man who would stand at a table and choose her over the family that had shaped every day of his life. Because every great love story has a before. And theirs was as complicated and as painful as the land that brought them together. Winifred Barrett arrived in the Cimarron Valley of New Mexico Territory on a Thursday afternoon in late April of 1880, and she arrived alone, which caused a significant amount of commentary among the residents of the small town of Harrow's Crossing. Women did not arrive alone in places like Harrow's Crossing in 1880. Or rather, women did arrive alone, but the ones who did were generally assumed to be in some variety of trouble, and the town's residents were not wrong about that assumption as often as they might have liked. But Winifred was not in trouble. Winifred was in possession of a deed. She was 24 years old, 5 feet and 5 inches tall, with dark auburn hair that she wore pinned up under a battered brown hat that had seen considerably better days, and green eyes that had the quality of looking straight through whatever they landed on and seeing the thing behind it. She had strong hands, calloused already from the journey west, and she carried herself with the particular upright posture of someone who has been told repeatedly that the world will try to knock her down and has decided to make that as difficult as possible. The deed was to 320 acres of land in the eastern portion of the Cimarron Valley, inherited from her father, Edward Barrett, who had homesteaded the claim in 1876 and died of a fever in the winter of 1879, before he could do much more with it than stake the basic boundaries and build a one-room structure that might generously be called a cabin. Edward Barrett had been a stubborn, visionary, impractical man who had loved his only daughter ferociously and had left her with two things: the deed to those acres and a letter written in a shaking hand during his final days that said, in its entirety, "Winnie, this land is good land. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. It will give back what you put into it. Your father." She had read that letter so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. She arrived in Harrow's Crossing with enough money to purchase basic supplies for 6 months, a wagon that needed new wheel spokes, 2 horses that were tired from the journey but sound, and a determination so complete and so concentrated that it functioned almost like a physical force in the space around her. The storekeeper, a round-faced man named Hollis, watched her purchase flour and salt and nails, and a new saw blade with the fascination of a man watching an unusual natural phenomenon. "You're the Barrett girl," he said, when she was counting out her coins with methodical precision. "I am Winifred Barrett," she said. "Yes. Your daddy's parcel," Hollis said. "You mean to work it yourself?" "I mean to do exactly that." Hollis looked at her for a long moment. He was not an unkind man, and what his expression communicated was not contempt but genuine concern, which was almost worse because it required a more complicated response than contempt did. "Miss Barrett," he said carefully, "the Quinn family runs cattle through that eastern portion of the valley. Has for years. They consider that range theirs." "Do they have a deed?" Winifred asked. Hollis hesitated. "Not to that specific." "Then they are mistaken," Winifred said pleasantly, and finished counting her coins, and that was the end of that conversation. She was not naive. She understood exactly what Hollis was telling her. She had heard plenty about the Quinn family during her journey to the valley. The Quinns were one of those frontier dynasties that occur when a single-driven patriarch arrives early enough and works hard enough, and is ruthless enough at the right moments to accumulate land and influence, and a kind of informal authority that the law has not quite caught up with yet. Old Silas Quinn had come to the Cimarron Valley in 1865, and had built his ranch from a single herd of longhorns and a ferocious willingness to outlast everyone around him. He had died in 1877, leaving 3 sons. Randall, who was 38 now and ran the ranch with the same iron hand his father had used. Warren, who was 35 and handled the business arrangements with a quiet efficiency that was somehow more unsettling than Randall's blunt aggression. And Dexter, who was 29, and who was responsible for the day-to-day management of the cattle operation, and who was widely regarded as the most capable of the 3 brothers despite being the youngest, and who Winifred Barrett had not yet met. She found her father's cabin on the 2nd day after her arrival. She found it, and she stood in front of it for a long time without speaking, and what she felt was not grief exactly, though grief was part of it. What she felt was the weight of everything this land represented. The years her father had talked about it, the hope he had carried for it, the life he had imagined here that she was now going to have to build from the wreckage of a dream that had been interrupted before it could become real. The cabin was small and rough, and the roof had partially collapsed over the winter. There was no well yet, only a creek a quarter-mile east. The land itself was a mix of good grass and rocky upland and a long flat stretch along the creek bottom that had the dark, rich look of genuinely productive soil. Her father had been right. It was good land. She set her wagon next to the cabin, unhitched her horses, and got to work. The first time she saw Dexter Quinn, she almost shot him. It was 3 weeks after her arrival. She had repaired the roof of the cabin and was in the process of expanding the structure when she heard hoofbeats coming from the western boundary of her property, where her father's claim met the open range that the Quinns ran their cattle across. She came around the corner of the cabin with her Winchester in her hands, not pointed at anything yet, just held, because 3 weeks of living alone on a frontier property had rapidly calibrated her instincts toward caution. He stopped his horse about 30 feet from her. He was on a tall bay gelding, and he was a very tall man, broad across the shoulders, with dark hair under a gray hat and a face that had the weather-beat, angular quality of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. He looked at the Winchester in her hands with an expression that was carefully neutral. "You are on Barrett land," Winifred said. "I would appreciate it if you would state your business." "Dexter Quinn," he said. He did not reach for his hat in a formal greeting which might have read as disrespect but somehow did not. He just said his name plainly, as if it was information she was entitled to have. "My family's cattle have been ranging through this valley for 15 years. Your family's cattle are welcome to continue ranging through your family's land," Winifred said. "They are not welcome on mine." He looked at her steadily. There was something in his expression that she could not immediately read, and she was generally good at reading expressions. "You are Winifred Barrett," he said. "I am." "Your father filed that claim in 1876, he said, and it was not a question. He had done his research. "He did," she said. "The deed is legal and registered. If you are here to tell me otherwise, you are wasting your time. If you are here to introduce yourself politely and establish a mutual understanding of property boundaries, I have time for that conversation." Something shifted in his expression. It was very slight. If she had not been watching him carefully, she would have missed it. It might have been the ghost of a smile, suppressed immediately out of some consideration for dignity. "My brother Randall sent me to assess the situation," he said. "And what is your assessment?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the cabin, at the work she had done on the roof, at the new wall framing she had started that morning. He looked at the horses in the makeshift corral she had built. He looked at her garden plot, which was small and roughly prepared but methodically laid out. He looked at all of it with the attentive eyes of a man who genuinely understood land and what it took to work it. "My assessment," he said finally, "is that you know what you are doing." It was the last thing she had expected him to say. She was not entirely sure what she had expected, but it was not that. "I would like the fence line along the western boundary to be clear," she said, after a moment. "I plan to put in posts next week. I would appreciate it if your cattle were kept to the west of that line." He nodded. "I will speak to the hands," he said. And then he turned his horse and rode west without another word. She stood there in the April sunshine with her Winchester and watched him go. And she told herself that the only reason she tracked his departure for as long as she did was because it was prudent to watch anyone who had access to your property line until they were clearly off it. She did not entirely believe herself. The fence line went up the following week. His hand stayed west of it. She noted that and did not say anything about it to anyone, but she noted it. The first true encounter came 6 weeks later in early June, when a section of her fence line was cut. She discovered it on a Tuesday morning, a clean diagonal cut on 3 posts in a row, the wire pulled back and piled to the side with a deliberateness that made it clear this was not the work of cattle pressing against the wire. This was intentional. She stood looking at it with her hands at her sides and felt the cold, specific anger of someone who has worked very hard for something and can see the outline of what is trying to take it away. She spent 2 hours repairing the fence. Then she saddled her horse and rode west toward the Quinn Ranch. She had heard about the Quinn Ranch from Holly's and from a few other people in Harrow's Crossing who had been willing to talk to her. It was a substantial operation. 3,000 acres, a main house that had been built in stages and was now an imposing 2-story structure, a bunkhouse for the hands, a proper stable. When she rode into the yard, she could feel the weight of the place, the accumulated decades of investment and intention. She understood why the Quinns were protective of this valley. She even, to a degree, understood why they resented her presence. But understanding a thing and accepting its consequences were 2 different matters. Randall Quinn came out onto the porch before she had dismounted. He was a big man, bigger than Dexter, with the kind of face that might have been handsome once, and had hardened into something less approachable over years of getting what he wanted through sheer force of will. He looked at her with an expression that managed to be both dismissive and calculating, which was a combination she recognized as dangerous. "Miss Barrett," he said, "you have a complaint." "I have a fence that was cut this morning," she said. 3 posts, clean diagonal cuts, deliberately done. I have repaired it. I am here to let you know that if it happens again, I will be reporting it to the county sheriff." Randall's expression did not change. "Wire breaks," he said. "Posts rot. Country like this is hard on fences." "The posts were 2 months old and the cuts were made with a tool," she said. "I am not interested in being told otherwise." "You are a long way from your nearest neighbor, Miss Barrett," Randall said, and the remark had a specific texture to it that was not quite a threat but was arranged deliberately close to one. "I am aware of that," she said evenly. "I am also in possession of a legally registered deed and the full rights it confers. Good afternoon, Mr. Quinn." She turned her horse and rode back the way she had come, and she kept her spine straight and her pace measured because she understood that how you left a confrontation mattered almost as much as how you conducted yourself during it. She did not see Dexter on that visit, but she had the distinct feeling as she rode away that she was being watched from somewhere, and that the watching was not hostile. She was right about both things. Dexter had been at the barn on the eastern side of the Quinn property when Winifred Barrett rode into the yard. He had seen her come in and had heard the conversation from 30 feet away with the kind of still attention of a man who is learning something important. He watched his brother and he watched Winifred, and he felt the familiar pull of a conflict he had been trying to suppress since her arrival in the valley. Because the truth was that Dexter Quinn had known about Winifred Barrett before she arrived. He had known about the Barrett claim for 3 years, since before Edward Barrett died. He was the one who had handled the Eastern Range, who had checked the filed claims at the county seat when his father was still alive, who had read the survey notes and understood exactly what those 320 acres represented. He had told his father. He had told Randall. He had suggested, carefully, that the family should accept the situation and adjust their range accordingly. He had not been listened to. And now Winifred Barrett was here, and she was everything the situation required: prepared, legally protected, and unintimidated. And he was watching his brother look at her the way a man looks at a problem he is measuring for the right kind of pressure. He knew what Randall was going to try. He had known it was coming since the day she arrived, and he had been lying awake at night trying to figure out what he was going to do about it. What he did, 3 days after her visit to the ranch, was ride east to her property line, not across it. He stopped at the fence, which was neatly repaired, and waited until she came out of the cabin, which she did after about 5 minutes, carrying her Winchester as before. "You stopped the fence cutting," she said, when she was close enough to speak without raising her voice. It was not quite an accusation and not quite a question. It was an observation offered in a tone that invited a response. "I spoke to the hands," he said. "It will not happen again." She looked at him for a moment. "Was it your idea or was it your order being countermanded?" He respected the directness of that enormously. "The second thing," he said. She nodded. She lowered the Winchester slightly, not all the way, but slightly. "What does your brother intend to do?" she asked. "He intends to make it difficult for you to stay," Dexter said. He had decided on the ride over that he was not going to lie to her or soften things. She had not asked for softness. She had asked for the truth, and the truth was what the situation required. She absorbed this without visible flinching. "Is he going to succeed?" "Not if you hold your ground," Dexter said, "and it appears that you are good at that." Something moved in her green eyes, not softness, not gratitude exactly, something more like recognition, as though she was revising a category she had placed him in and was not entirely sure where to put him now. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. It was the question he had been asking himself for 3 days. He had not arrived at a clean answer. "Because it is true and because you deserve to know it," he said. "And because this valley is big enough for both operations if people are willing to deal honestly." She looked at him for a long time. The afternoon sun was cutting across the creek bottom behind her, and the light was doing complicated things, and he was trying very hard not to think about how it looked on her hair. Dexter Quinn, she said slowly, as though tasting the name and assessing its flavor. You are not what I expected. I know, he said. I apologize for the fence. He touched his hat brim, which he had not done before, and turned his horse west. The summer of 1880 was hard but not defeating. Winifred Barrett planted her garden and tended her small herd of 6 cattle that she had bought with the last of her cash reserves, and she worked the land with a focused intensity that impressed even people who had initially been skeptical of her ability to manage alone. She hired one hand, a quiet older man named Prentice, who had been a homesteader himself once and understood the particular demands of frontier solitude and the value of not asking unnecessary questions. Between the two of them, they worked the land methodically, and it began, slowly, to answer. Randall Quinn's pressure did not stop. The fence was not cut again, but there were other methods available to a man with Randall's resources and creativity. A supply delivery from Harrow's Crossing was diverted, the driver claiming he had not been paid in advance, though Winifred's receipts were clear. 2 of her cattle were found 3 miles west of her boundary without explanation, and the time and trouble of retrieving them from Quinn Range was considerable. A water access dispute flared briefly over the creek, Randall claiming through his lawyer that a prior use agreement gave the Quinn cattle rights to the Eastern Fork, a claim that had no documentary basis, but required 2 months of back-and-forth correspondence with the county seat to formally dismiss. Through all of it, Winifred Barrett held her ground. And through all of it, Dexter Quinn found reasons to be on the eastern portion of his family's range. They did not have what either of them would have called a friendship, not exactly. What they had was a series of conversations conducted across a fence line or in occasional proximity when the necessities of the valley brought them to the same location at the same time. He helped her once without planning to, when she was struggling to move a section of fence post alone, and he happened to be passing within view and stopped without being asked, and they worked in silence for 2 hours, and the fence was finished, and he rode away without having exchanged more than 10 words with her. She brought him water that afternoon. She crossed her fence line with a canteen and handed it to him across the distance between them, and their hands did not touch, but they were close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him after the work. "Thank you," she said. "You are doing something hard," he said. "Doing it alone makes it harder." "I know what I am doing," she said. "I never doubted that," he said. There was a moment between them then. One of those moments that both parties recognize and both parties choose, by unspoken mutual agreement, not to name yet, because naming it would change the terrain of everything, and neither of them was quite ready for that. He drank the water and handed the canteen back and rode west. He thought about her all the way home. The autumn brought a new complication. It arrived in the form of a man named Garrett Foss, who rode into Harrow's Crossing in September of 1880 and presented himself as a land agent representing a group of Eastern investors who were interested in acquiring property in the Cimarron Valley. Foss was a smooth, well-dressed man in his early 40s, with the kind of easy sociability that functions as camouflage for a meticulous intelligence. He bought drinks for men at the saloon and asked careful questions and listened more than he spoke, and within 2 weeks he had a very clear picture of the valley's property landscape and the ongoing tension around the Barrett claim. He met Winifred at Hollis's store in late September. He introduced himself as a businessman, expressed admiration for her enterprise, and made his first offer before they had been speaking for 10 minutes. It was a generous offer. More generous than anything Randall Quinn had put forward, and far more generous than the land's current developed value would justify. Winifred looked at the number he wrote on the paper he slid across Hollis's counter and understood immediately that it was not an honest offer. Generous offers in a situation like hers were never honest. They were either traps or opening moves in a negotiation she was not equipped for. "I am not selling," she said, and slid the paper back. Foss smiled. "Miss Barrett, I wonder if you have fully considered." "I have fully considered," she said. "I am not selling." She described the meeting to Dexter 3 days later, when he rode by the eastern fence line on his regular, not entirely coincidental circuit of the range. He listened to the description of Foss with an expression that grew progressively more serious. "Garrett Foss," he said. "You know him." "I know of him," he said. "He has worked land acquisition in Arizona territory. His investors are real, but their methods are not always clean." He paused. "He came to see Randall as well last week." She was very still. "Randall and Foss together," she said. "I do not know what was discussed," Dexter said. "I only know the meeting happened." "But you can guess." "Yes," he said, "I can guess." This was the moment, if there was a single identifiable moment, when what existed between them moved from something careful and circumscribed into something more urgent. The threat was no longer abstract. It was a specific man with a specific amount of money who was working in coordination with the family that already wanted her gone, and the scale of it was larger and more organized than anything she had faced so far. "What would you do?" she asked him. It was the first time she had asked him anything like that. Not a question about property lines or water rights or which hands were responsible for which incidents. A question about what he, specifically Dexter Quinn as a human being with his own judgment, would do in her position. "I would make sure every piece of documentation related to that land was in perfect order," he said. "The deed, the survey, the homestead filing, all of it. I would get copies to the county seat and another set to the territorial capital in Santa Fe. And then I would make sure the land itself was so clearly and actively worked that there was no legal basis for any abandonment claim or adverse possession argument." She nodded slowly. "You think they will try a legal angle? Foss will try to buy it. If that fails, Randall might try something else." He hesitated. "There are lawyers in Santa Fe who specialize in finding weaknesses in homestead filings. Minor procedural failures that were common enough in 1876 when your father filed. If any such weakness exists, it would need to be identified and corrected before someone else identifies it." "How do you know all of this?" she asked. The question was not accusatory. It was genuinely curious. She was trying to understand who he was, which was something she had been doing since the first day she saw him. "I have watched my family operate in this valley for a long time," he said. "And I have thought about what is right and what is legal being two different things often enough that I have become familiar with the space between them." She looked at him then with the full weight of her green eyes, and he felt it like a hand laid flat on his chest. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. It was the second time she had asked him something close to this question, and this time it carried more freight because more had passed between them. "Because your father earned that land and you are working it honestly, and you deserve every acre you have," he said. "And because there is a difference between competing hard in business and doing wrong, and I was raised by a man who did not always know where that line was, and I have spent years trying to know it better." She did not look away from him. "Dexter," she said, and it was the first time she had used his given name. "Winifred," he said, and it was careful and it was weighted and it held everything that neither of them had said yet. She went to Santa Fe that October, a journey of 3 days by stage, and she sat across from a lawyer named Abernathy who had been recommended by the county recorder, and she spread every document she had across his desk and watched him go through them with the methodical attention of a man who was very good at his work. She had followed Dexter's advice. She had organized everything perfectly. Abernathy found one issue. A minor procedural failure in the original filing, a missing witness signature on one of the survey verification forms from 1876. It was a small thing, but it was exactly the kind of small thing that could be exploited by someone looking for a crack to pry open. She had it corrected while she was in Santa Fe. She paid Abernathy's fee from her last financial reserve, which meant she arrived back in the valley with considerably less margin than she had left with, but with a land claim that was now airtight. When she told Dexter what she had found and corrected, standing at the fence line in the cold October air with her breath making small clouds between them, he was quiet for a moment, And then he said, "Good. That is very good," and the relief in his voice was so genuine and so unguarded that something shifted in her chest. "You were worried," she said. "I was worried," he admitted. "About my land." He looked at her and did not immediately answer, and the hesitation itself was the answer. "About you," he said. They stood there in the October cold and looked at each other, and the thing that had been growing between them for 5 months was suddenly very present and very large, and neither of them was pretending not to see it anymore. "This is complicated," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "Your family, I know. I will not give up the land. I would not ask you to. I would not want you to." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You should come to dinner," and the words were delivered with her characteristic directness, but her voice had something in it that was not her normal tone, and he noticed it immediately. "Yes," he said, "I will come to dinner." He came the following Sunday. He rode east across the Quinn Range and stopped his horse at her fence and dismounted, and tied it to the post and walked across the property to her cabin with a deliberateness in his step that suggested he understood exactly what this meant. He brought a bottle of wine from Santa Fe that he had sent away for through Hollies 3 weeks ago, without fully admitting to himself why he was doing it. She opened the door when she heard him coming, and the look on her face was complicated and honest and not trying to be anything other than what it was. "You came," she said. "I said I would," he said. "People say many things," she said. "I know," he said. "I came." She had cooked a proper meal, not fancy, the resources did not permit fancy, but careful and good. Roasted pork from a hog prentice had butchered, root vegetables from her garden, cornbread, and the wine he had brought. They sat across from each other at her small table, and they ate and they talked, and what struck him, what he would remember later as the moment he understood with absolute certainty what was happening, was how easy it was. How completely natural it was to sit across from this woman and talk for 3 hours without either of them running out of things to say. She told him about her father, about growing up in Illinois with a man who dreamed of the West with the fervor of a believer, and who passed that fervor to his daughter like an inheritance that was more valuable than property. She told him about her mother, who had died when Winifred was 12, and how she and her father had been a self-sufficient unit of 2 for 12 years after that. She told him about the letter he had left her and recited it from memory, and he listened to those simple words. "This land is good land. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise," with an expression that she could not quite describe, but that made her throat tight. He told her about his father, which was harder. Silas Quinn had been a formidable man and not always a kind one. He had driven his sons the way he drove his cattle, with pressure and direction and very little allowance for deviation. He had loved them in his way, Dexter believed, but his way had been constrained by his certainty that weakness was the only thing that could defeat a man in a country like this, and his efforts to make his sons strong had sometimes made them afraid to be anything other than hard. "And you?" she asked. "Are you afraid of that?" "I was," he said. "I spent a long time being exactly what he built me to be, and then I started noticing the things his methods left out." He paused. "Fairness. Acknowledgement of other people's rights. The idea that you can be strong without taking from someone else. And your brothers did not arrive at the same conclusions," she said. "Randall arrived at the opposite conclusion," he said. "He decided that what father built required expansion at any cost. Warren is not comfortable with that, but he is not going to fight Randall over it." He looked at his wine glass. "And I have been navigating the space between what I know is right and what my family is doing for long enough that I understand exactly how much it has cost me." "And yet you are here," she said. "And yet I am here," he agreed, and looked up at her, and the way he was looking at her was not complicated at all. It was the simplest and most direct thing in the world. He left at 10 o'clock because propriety demanded it, and because he was not a man who disregarded propriety, not because he was afraid of what people thought, but because he believed some forms of respect were worth maintaining. He said good night at her door, and she stood in the doorway with lamplight behind her, and he felt the pull of it like gravity. "Next Sunday," she said. "Next Sunday," he agreed. The next Sunday he came again, and the Sunday after that. And what grew between them over that autumn was the most genuinely surprising thing that had ever happened to Dexter Quinn, because he had not expected to find this. He had not expected to find someone who matched him so completely in the ways that mattered. Her intelligence, her stubbornness, her humor, which was dry and sudden and appeared at unexpected moments. The way she thought about the land as a living thing that required honesty and attention rather than a resource to be extracted. The way she held her opinions firmly, but remained actually open to revision when presented with genuine evidence, which was a quality he had found rare in anyone. He did not tell his brothers about the Sunday dinners, not immediately. He was not ashamed of them. It was simply that he understood the moment he named them he would have to defend them, and he was not ready to have that fight while the thing itself was still fragile and new and needed space to become what it was becoming. It was Warren who discovered it in December. He saw Dexter's horse tied to Winifred's fence post on a Sunday afternoon and mentioned it to Randall without. Warren would later say defensively, meaning to cause trouble. Randall confronted Dexter that evening. It was a cold confrontation, quiet and controlled, which was somehow worse than a loud one. Randall laid out what he knew with the precision of a man who had rehearsed the conversation, and he framed it not as a question about Dexter's personal life, but as a question about loyalty, which was the framing most likely to hurt. "You are compromised," Randall said. "You are making decisions about the Eastern Range based on personal feeling rather than family interest." "I am making decisions about the Eastern Range based on what is legal and what is fair," Dexter said. "Those are the same thing as far as this family is concerned." "They are not," Dexter said, "and they never have been." "Dexter," Randall's voice was quiet and heavy. "She is a single woman alone on a frontier property with a marginal claim and no allies. In 2 years she will have run herself out of capital and she will sell. This is a waiting game. All you need to do is stay out of it." "I am not going to stay out of it," Dexter said, "and if you move against her I will oppose it, directly." Randall looked at him with the particular expression of someone revising their understanding of a situation they thought they had controlled. "You are serious," Randall said. "I have been serious for a long time," Dexter said. "You have simply not been listening." He walked out of the main house and went to the bunkhouse and lay on his cot in the dark and stared at the ceiling and acknowledged to himself, with full honesty, that he was in love with Winifred Barrett. Had been for some time, probably since October, possibly since June, and that the acknowledgement of this fact did not simplify anything at all. It made everything more complicated and more urgent and more alive. He rode east the next morning, not on Sunday, not in the evening, but in the clear cold light of a December Monday, and when she came to the door of her cabin she read his face and stepped back to let him in without asking questions. He sat down and told her everything. He told her about Randall and Foss and the plan as he now understood it, which had evolved beyond simple pressure into something more structured. Foss had been doing legal research. There were investors with genuine money behind him. The scheme was to challenge the Barrett claim on procedural grounds, which would be difficult now that she had fixed the filing. But the correction she had made in Santa Fe had to be formally recorded, and there might be a window during which a legal challenge could be filed before that correction appeared in the right registries. He told her this with the full knowledge that telling her was a betrayal of his family in the traditional sense of that word, and that he had decided with full awareness of the cost that it did not matter. "Dexter," she said when he had finished, "what does this mean for you, telling me this?" "It means I have made a choice," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she crossed the small space of her cabin and sat in the chair close to his and took his hand in both of hers, and he went very still. "I need you to understand something," she said. Her voice was not soft. It was her normal voice, clear and direct, but it was holding something that was purely emotional and not trying to disguise it. "I did not come here to find a man. I came here to work this land and to honor what my father gave me. That is still true. That is still what I am doing." "I know," he said, And I am not going to be in any arrangement that requires me to be lesser than what I am, she said. Not for anyone, not even for someone she stopped. I would not ask that of you, he said. I would not want that. I want exactly what you are. He turned his hand over in hers and held on. I am not here to take anything from you. I am here because there is nowhere else I want to be. She looked down at their joined hands and then up at his face, and she let herself, for the first time since she had arrived in this valley, let her expression show exactly what she felt without the filter of self-protection. Then stay, she said. Not that night, not like that. She meant something larger. She meant it as a statement about the future and a question about his intentions and a declaration of her own. And he understood all of that perfectly. I will stay, he said. He did not get back to the Quinn ranch until after dark, and when he did he found Randall waiting for him, which meant Warren had reported his departure direction, and the conversation that followed was the confrontation that had been building for months and had finally arrived. But that confrontation belonged to January and to the sequence of events that brought us to the beginning of this story, to Dexter Quinn standing at the head of that pine table in the ranch house with his conviction blazing in the smoky air and his brother staring at him. In the weeks between that December morning in her cabin and the January confrontation, several things happened. Garrett Foss filed a legal challenge to the Barrett claim in the county court at Cimarron City. The challenge cited the procedural deficiency in the original 1876 filing, apparently without knowledge that it had already been corrected in Santa Fe. Winifred received the notice by post and read it with absolute composure, and immediately wrote a letter to Abernathy in Santa Fe asking for documentation of the correction and confirmation of its proper registration. Dexter, when she showed him the challenge, looked at the paperwork carefully and said, "This will not succeed. The correction is registered, but it will take time to resolve, and Foss knows that. He is not trying to win the legal challenge. He is trying to create a period of uncertainty during which you cannot sell or further develop the property, which creates financial pressure. He underestimates my capacity to wait," she said. "He underestimates many things about you," Dexter said. She smiled at him. It was not a happy smile exactly, but it was real and warm, and it did something complicated to his breathing. He began to spend time on her property that was not confined to Sundays. He came in the evenings sometimes, after his work on the Quinn Range was finished, ostensibly to check the fence line, but in reality because the cabin where she lived had become the place he most wanted to be on earth, and he had stopped pretending otherwise. They talked and they argued about small things, and they found each other's opinions interesting in the particular way that indicates genuine intellectual respect. He helped with repairs on the expanding structure of her cabin. She helped him think through a persistent problem he was having with the grazing rotation on the Quinn Range's southern portion. Prentice, who was a quiet man and a perceptive one, observed all of this without comment for 6 weeks before saying, one morning when Dexter had arrived early and was helping mend a section of corral fence, "You are good for her, Mr. Quinn." He did not look up from the post he was tamping. "And she is good for you. If you have not already figured that out, you are slower than you appear." "I have figured it out," Dexter said. "Good," said Prentice. "Then behave accordingly." The legal challenge was moving through the county court system with the torpor typical of frontier legal processes, and while it moved, Foss was doing other things. He was speaking to people in Harrow's Crossing, planting the suggestion that the Barrett claim was legally precarious and that anyone who did business with Winifred was taking on risk. Her credit at Hollis's store came under informal pressure. One of her contract buyers for the spring cattle market sent a letter withdrawing from their arrangement, citing uncertainty about the property. It was the cattle buyer that finally made Dexter angry in a way that went beyond the controlled, deliberate opposition he had been conducting. He arrived at her fence line on a Tuesday evening in late January, with a tension in his jaw that she recognized from the very first time she had seen him. "Tell me," she said simply. He told her about the cattle buyer. She was quiet when he finished. "I have other options for the spring sale," she said. "It will cost me in terms of price, but it will not stop me." "I know," he said. "Winifred, I need to speak to Randall." "You have been speaking to Randall," she said. "Not the way I need to." He looked at her directly. "I need to make him understand that this ends. That whatever he and Foss are doing with the buyers and the credit and all of it, it ends. And I need him to understand why." She was quiet for a moment. The wind came across the creek bottom and moved through the fence wire with a sound that was almost a voice. "Why now?" she asked. "What is different now?" "Because I love you," he said. He said it the way he said his own name, plainly, as information she was entitled to have. "And I will not watch the people I come from do this to someone I love without standing in front of it directly." The word hung in the cold air between them. She looked at him for a long time, and her green eyes were doing the thing they did, looking through the surface of what was visible to what was underneath. And what they found underneath Dexter Quinn in this moment was exactly what he was: honest and certain and frightened and unshaken all at once. "I love you too," she said. "I have been trying not to for months." He crossed the distance between them in 2 steps, and she came toward him at the same moment. And when he took her face in both his hands and kissed her, it was the most important thing that had happened in the Cimarron Valley in a considerable time, which neither of them was in a position to appreciate in the moment, but both of them would understand later. He rode to the Quinn ranch that evening and found Randall and Warren in the main house, and that was the night of the confrontation at the table, the night we began with. The night Dexter Quinn stood at the head of the long pine table and said the words that cracked the family open. "She works this valley honestly, and she deserves every acre she has." Randall was on his feet, his face flushed with controlled fury, and he was saying things about loyalty and blood and the family's legacy and everything that Silas Quinn had built, and Dexter listened to all of it standing absolutely still with his hands flat on the table. "I know what Father built," Dexter said, when Randall's speech had run its course. "I helped build it. I know every acre of this ranch and every year of work that went into it. And I am telling you, as someone who loves this family and always will, that what you are doing now has nothing to do with what Father built and everything to do with what you have decided his legacy requires that he never decided himself. Silas Quinn was hard, and he was often wrong in his methods, but he did not persecute single women on legal land. That is your addition to the family history, Randall. That is yours." The silence was absolute. Warren, who had not spoken, was staring at the table. Randall's jaw worked. The flush on his face was deepening. "You have made your choice," Randall said finally, very quietly. "I have made my choice," Dexter agreed. "And I am making it openly in front of both of you, so there is no confusion about where I stand." "If you stand with her, you do not stand with us," Randall said. "I stand with what is right," Dexter said. "I hope what is right is also where my family stands, but if it is not, then I know which side I am on." He left the house. He walked to the barn and saddled his horse and rode east in the January dark. And he rode all the way to the fence line of Winifred Barrett's property and stopped there, and looked at the cabin with its single lit window and the light inside it, and he sat on his horse in the cold dark and felt the full weight of what he had just done, and did not regret one syllable of it. She was awake, which did not surprise him. She came to the door when she heard his horse, and she stood in the doorway with the lamp behind her and looked at him. "It is done," he said. "I told them." "How did Randall take it?" "As expected." She stepped back from the doorway in invitation, and he dismounted and tied his horse and walked up to her cabin and went inside, and she closed the door behind him, and they stood close in the small warm space, and she looked up at him with the full uncovered weight of what she felt. "What happens now?" she asked. "The legal challenge will play out," he said. "It will fail. Your claim is solid. Foss will eventually move on to easier targets because that is what men like Foss do." He paused. "Randall and I will have to find a way to coexist, which will be difficult for a while. Warren will come around. He is not a bad man. He is simply a man who has been following his older brother for too long." "And you?" she asked. "What do you want now?" It was a question with very large implications, and she knew that when she asked it, and he knew that when he heard it. He looked at her standing there in the lamplight of the cabin her father had imagined and she had built into something real, and he knew exactly what he wanted. "I want to be here," he said, "with you, in this valley, building something honest." "That is a significant thing to want," she said. "I am a significant amount serious about it," he said. She almost smiled. "Dexter Quinn," she said, "are you asking me to marry you?" "I am working up to it with somewhat more formality than I have managed so far," he said. And then he did what he had been building to and took her hands and looked at her with complete and uncomplicated honesty. "Winifred Barrett, I have watched you work this land and stand your ground and tell the truth without exception for the better part of a year, and you are the bravest and most honest person I know, and I love you, and I would be honored beyond measure if you would consider marrying me." She looked at him for a very long moment. Her eyes were doing the looking through thing, but what they were looking through was his words, and finding behind them nothing but exactly what he meant. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you, with the full understanding that this land is mine and remains mine and is not a subject for renegotiation." "Winifred," he said, "I would be disappointed if you had said anything else." She laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded and warm, and it was the most beautiful sound in the Cimarron Valley on that cold January night. The spring of 1881 came in slowly, and with the particular quality of springs in New Mexico territory. Cold nights and brilliant days, and the gradual return of green to the valley floor that felt like a promise kept by the land itself. The legal challenge to the Barrett claim was formally dismissed by the county court in February, the presiding judge noting in his written decision that the claim had been filed in proper order, and that the procedural matter cited in the challenge had been correctly resolved, and the challenge had no legitimate basis in law. Garrett Foss received the court's decision, spent 3 days being visible in Harrow's Crossing with a carefully managed expression of unconcern, and then left the valley without announcement and was not heard from again in the Cimarron region. Randall Quinn was silent for a month. The silence had a different quality than his usual silences. It was not the silence of a man planning his next move. It was the silence of a man sitting with something he did not want to sit with, which was the recognition that he had been wrong, or at least that the ground he had been standing on was not as solid as he had believed. It was Warren who came east first. He rode to the Barrett property on a Saturday morning in March without Randall and without announcement, and knocked on the door of the cabin with the expression of a man performing an act of social courage. Winifred opened the door. She looked at him with her clear green eyes and waited. "I am Warren Quinn," he said. "I believe you know who I am." "I do," she said. "I owe you an apology," he said. "And I know that an apology from one member of a family does not stand in for the whole, but I am offering what I have the right to offer." He paused. "What was done to you, the fence, the buyers, the legal challenge, none of it was right. I knew that, and I did not say so loudly enough. I am sorry for that." Winifred looked at him for a moment and then stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. "I have coffee." Warren Quinn sat at Winifred Barrett's table and drank her coffee, and the two of them talked for an hour. Not warmly, not yet, but honestly, which was the beginning of something. He told her about the family as he understood it from inside it, and she told him about her father and the land as she understood it. And by the end of the coffee, they had a reasonable mutual comprehension of how the situation had developed and why, and that comprehension was the foundation on which something better could eventually be built. He told Dexter about the visit that evening. Dexter listened to everything Warren said and then said simply, "Thank you." Warren looked at him with the complicated expression of a middle brother who has spent years watching his siblings pull in opposite directions. "She is good for you," Warren said. "I can see that." "She is," Dexter said. "She is the best thing that has happened to me in this valley." "I think you might be the best thing that has happened to her too," Warren said. though I imagined she would find a more efficient way to say it. Dexter smiled. She would say it was the land, he said, and she would be right, but she would also mean me. Dexter and Winifred were married in May of 1881 in Harrow's Crossing, in the small whitewashed church that had been built the previous year by the town's growing population of settlers. The ceremony was conducted by a Methodist minister named Reverend Hale, who was a compact, energetic man with wire-rimmed spectacles, and a conviction that the frontier was a place where God's work was being done in real time. He had married several couples in the valley and seemed to find genuine joy in the ritual. Winifred wore a dress she had made herself from fabric she had ordered from the general store, a deep green that matched her eyes, which was either a coincidence or a decision that Holly's made a mental note never to ask about. She wore her dark auburn hair down for the first time anyone in the valley had seen, and it fell to her shoulders and caught the May morning light, and Dexter Quinn stood at the front of the church and watched her walk toward him with the particular expression of a man who cannot believe his life has arranged itself into this moment. Warren stood with Dexter. Prentice sat in the front pew on Winifred's side and looked dignified and pleased. Most of Harrow's Crossing had turned out because, in small frontier towns, weddings were significant community events, and because Winifred Barrett had become, in the year she had been in the valley, someone that people respected and were slightly in awe of. Randall Quinn came late. He walked in during the opening words of the ceremony and took a seat in the back pew and sat with his hat on his knee and his face held carefully neutral. He had not told Dexter he was coming. He had not told anyone. After the ceremony, as the small crowd moved outside into the spring sunshine, Randall approached Dexter and Winifred standing together on the church steps. He stopped in front of them and looked at Winifred directly for the first time, not the assessing, strategic look he had given her at the ranch house 14 months ago, but something else. A more honest look. "Mrs. Quinn," he said. He tried the name and seemed to find it harder to say than he had expected. "I owe you a better introduction than the one this year has provided." Winifred looked at him steadily. "Then provide one," she said. It was so completely her that Dexter felt a rush of love so large it almost embarrassed him. Randall's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something in the vicinity. "I am Randall Quinn," he said. "I run the family ranch. I have not always run it wisely. I am working on that." He paused. "I hope you and my brother will be happy." "We will be," Winifred said. "And the valley is large enough for all of us if we deal with each other honestly." "So I am told," Randall said, and his eyes moved briefly to Dexter with something in them that was not quite an apology and not quite an acknowledgement, and was, for Randall Quinn, a very significant communication. Dexter received it and nodded once. After the wedding they rode back to the Barrett property together, and Dexter stood on the porch of the cabin that was now his home as well as hers, and looked out across the 320 acres of the Cimarron Valley's eastern portion in the afternoon light, and felt the specific, settling weight of arriving somewhere. "What are you thinking?" Winifred asked, coming to stand beside him. "I am thinking that your father was right," he said. "This is good land." She leaned against him, which was a thing she did not often do in front of others but did naturally when they were alone, and he put his arm around her shoulders and they stood there together in the May light. "I want to expand the cattle operation," she said. "I have been thinking about the creek bottom land. If we develop the water access properly, the carrying capacity increases significantly." "I have been thinking the same thing," he said. "And there is a grazing rotation approach I want to try in the eastern portion that I believe would improve the grass quality over 2 seasons. She tilted her head back to look at him. "We could combine parts of the operation," she said carefully, "not the land. The land remains separate and distinct, but the operational elements, the management, the sale arrangements." "Yes," he said, "that is exactly what I was going to suggest." She smiled up at him. "We think alike," she said. "We do," he agreed. "It is extremely convenient." He kissed her then, on the porch of the home they would share. in the afternoon light of the first day of their marriage, and it was gentle and certain and full of the particular happiness of two people who have found each other through difficulty, and are not going to waste a moment of what they have been given. The summer of 1881 was the best season Winifred had seen in the valley. The garden produced abundantly. The small cattle herd grew, with the addition of 12 head that Dexter brought over from the Quinn operations surplus, sold to her at a fair price, negotiated in the full and businesslike way that she insisted upon. The creek bottom land yielded to the improved irrigation, approach they developed together over a series of evening conversations at the cabin table, with survey maps spread between them and coffee cups pushed to the edges. Prentice stayed on as the main hand, and was joined by a young man named Luis Montoya, the son of a Spanish land-grant family that had been in the territory since before the American period, who was 22 and had grown up on horses and cattle, and possessed a detailed knowledge of the local land that proved invaluable. Luis and Prentice formed a quiet, efficient working partnership that freed Dexter and Winifred to focus on the planning and management end of the operation. Dexter continued his work on the Quinn ranch during the days, splitting his time between the two operations with an efficiency that impressed even Randall, who was reluctantly coming to see that Dexter's value to the family operation had always been higher than any interpersonal dispute was worth. There were still difficulties between Randall and Dexter. There would probably always be some. Randall was not a man who revised himself easily. But the legal conflict was over, and the personal confrontation had reached whatever equilibrium was available to it, and what remained was family, complicated and imperfect as families always are. Warren rode east to visit once a month. He had a genuine interest in the development of the Barrett property, and an honest respect for how it was being managed. He and Winifred found, over time, a friendship built on a shared capacity for direct speech and an appreciation for things done well. It was not the friendship that forms between people who are naturally similar, but the friendship that forms between people who are naturally different and have each decided the other is worth knowing anyway. In the autumn of 1881, Winifred discovered she was pregnant. She told Dexter on a September evening when he came in from the eastern range at dusk, and found her standing at the cabin table with an expression that he could not immediately read, which was unusual because he had become very good at reading her. "I have something to tell you," she said. He put down his hat and looked at her. The something in her expression resolved itself as he watched into something that was simultaneously the largest news in the world and the most natural thing that had ever happened. "You are certain," he said. "Yes," she said. "About 3 months, I believe." He crossed the room and put his hands on her face and looked at her with an expression that she would remember for the rest of her life, complete and unguarded and full of a tenderness that he did not offer widely but directed toward her with an intensity that never failed to reach her. "Are you well?" he asked. "I am perfectly well," she said. "I am also going to keep working the land for as long as that is reasonable, and I will need you to understand that." "Of course," he said. "I am serious, Dexter. I am not going to become someone who sits by the fire while you manage everything." "I know that," he said. "I would not expect it of you. I would not want it. We will manage it together as we manage everything else." He paused. "I am very happy." "I am also very happy," she said. "I wanted to be certain before I told you." He pulled her close and she let herself be held, and they stood in the middle of the cabin that had started as a collapsed roof and a dream and had become a home and would now become something larger, and the September darkness came down gently over the valley outside. The winter was hard but manageable. Winifred worked the property into November, and then, as her pregnancy advanced, shifted to the management and planning work that she was equally suited for and did not require her to be in the cold. Dexter hired 2 additional seasonal hands for the winter and managed the physical demands of the property with the focus of a man who understood that the stakes of everything had just increased. He built an addition onto the cabin in November and December, working on it in the late afternoon hours after his regular work was done. A new room that would become the nursery and that he framed and enclosed with care, taking his time with the finish work in a way that surprised Prentice, who had not previously seen Dexter Quinn take particular interest in the fine points of carpentry. "It matters," Dexter said simply, when Prentice commented on it. "Yes, sir," said Prentice, and returned to his work with a satisfied expression. In February of 1882, in the new addition to the cabin that had been a collapsed ruin 2 years ago, Winifred Barrett Quinn gave birth to a son. The birth was attended by a midwife from Harrow's Crossing named Mrs. Caldwell, a capable and experienced woman who had delivered more than 40 babies in the territory, and had the calm authority of someone who had seen every variety of the process and was not rattled by any of them. Dexter waited outside the door of the new room for 4 hours with his hands pressed flat on his knees and his jaw tight, and when Mrs. Caldwell opened the door and said, "A boy, Mr. Quinn, and both doing very well," he stood up so fast he knocked the chair over. Winifred was propped against the pillow with the full, complicated expression of someone who has just done the hardest thing they have ever done and is deeply satisfied with the result. The baby in her arms was red-faced and emphatically present, and making a sound that fell somewhere between a declaration and a demand. "Hello," Dexter said, and his voice was not steady, and he did not try to make it steady. "He is very loud," Winifred said. "I believe he inherited that from your side." "The Quinn family has never lacked for volume," Dexter agreed, and sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked at his son with the expression of a man encountering something completely new and finding it overwhelming in the best possible way. "Edward," Winifred said. "I would like to call him Edward." Dexter looked at her. He understood immediately. "After your father," he said. "Yes, it is the right name," he said. "It is exactly the right name." Edward Barrett Quinn, born February 1882 in the Cimarron Valley of New Mexico Territory, in a cabin built on land that his grandfather had dreamed of, and his mother had defended, and his father had chosen over everything else. He arrived into a home that had been made by conviction and hard work and love, on land that was good land, as promised. Warren Quinn came to see the baby on the 3rd day, and sat in the cabin holding Edward with the slightly alarmed expression of a man who does not have much experience with infants, but is determined to manage it with dignity. He told Dexter privately, on the porch while Winifred rested, that Randall had asked about the baby, which was its own kind of communication. "Tell him he is welcome to come and see his nephew when he is ready to," Dexter said. Warren looked at him. "You would let that be easy for him." "I want my son to know his family," Dexter said. "All of it." Warren nodded. "I will tell him." Randall came in March. He knocked on the door of the cabin with his hat in his hands, and when Winifred opened it he looked at her and said nothing for a moment and then said, "I have come to see the child if you are willing." "Come in, Randall," she said, and her voice was not warm, but it was not cold either. It was what it had always been with her, honest and direct and unornamented. He sat in the chair by the fire and held Edward with a stiffness that gradually softened as the baby looked up at him with the unfocused, comprehensive attention of infants, who attend to everything without judgment. Randall's face did something complicated and then settled into something simpler and more honest. "He has the Quinn jaw," Randall said. "He has his grandfather Barrett's eyes," Winifred said. Randall looked at her. "That is the first time you have claimed him from both sides," he said. "He is from both sides," Winifred said. "That is what he is." Randall was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and it cost him something to say it, which was visible in how he said it, "I made mistakes regarding your property, regarding you. I am not a man who says these things easily, but I am saying them because they are true and because I would like to be part of this family." He paused. "All of this family." Winifred looked at him for a long moment with her searching green eyes. "Then be part of it honestly," she said. "That is all I have ever asked of anyone." Randall looked at his nephew, and then at his brother's wife, and then he nodded once, and it was not an easy nod or a casual one. It was the nod of a man who has just made a commitment and understood the weight of it. The years after Edward's birth were the years in which the Barrett Quinn operation became what Winifred had always known it could be. The creek bottom land, developed properly, proved exactly as productive as she had believed. The cattle herd grew in a managed, methodical way under the combined oversight of Dexter's knowledge of the larger regional market and Winifred's meticulous attention to the quality and condition of the animals. Louis Montoya grew into the most valuable working hand in the valley, eventually managing the day-to-day operation with a competence that allowed Dexter and Winifred to focus on expansion and planning. The legal and bureaucratic climate of New Mexico Territory was shifting throughout the early 1880s as statehood conversations gained traction, and the federal government paid more attention to land rights and homestead claims. Winifred's perfectly maintained documentation became an asset that she had the satisfaction of holding over no one, simply because it was never needed for anything other than its own inherent value. In the summer of 1883, Winifred discovered she was pregnant again. She told Dexter on a June evening with a directness and a happiness that she did not try to moderate. "I know it is difficult timing with the summer cattle work," she said. "The timing is exactly right," he said. "Every timing has been exactly right. You always say that," she said. "I always mean it," he said. She gave birth to a daughter in January of 1884, during a cold snap that glazed the valley floor with frost and made the cabin fire work hard to keep the rooms warm. The little girl arrived in the small hours of the morning, with the same emphatic energy her brother had brought to his arrival, and was placed in Winifred's arms with a completeness that settled over the room like a blanket. "Clara," Winifred said, looking at her daughter, after no one in particular. "Simply because it is a good name." "Clara Quinn," Dexter said. "It is a very good name." Edward, who was 2 years old and regarded the new arrival with the philosophical uncertainty appropriate to a child encountering a significant change, eventually decided after several days that Clara was an acceptable addition to the household, a verdict he delivered by sitting next to her basket and talking to her in a serious, informative way about the horses and the cattle and other matters of importance. Winifred watched her son lecture her daughter about horses from across the room and turned to find Dexter watching her watch them, and his expression was the one he had for her specifically, the one that was not reserved for anything else, and she felt it in the center of her chest the way she always felt it. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I am simply aware of how fortunate I am." "We are fortunate," she said, "both of us." "Yes," he agreed, "both of us." The Quinn Ranch and the Barrett Quinn operation reached a working accommodation in 1884 that would have been unrecognizable to Randall Quinn of 1880. The two operations shared certain market access arrangements that benefited both, negotiated between Dexter and Randall, with the careful, specific language of two men who have learned through difficulty how to speak honestly to each other. Winifred was present for several of these negotiations, not as a passive observer but as a full participant, and if Randall found the adjustment difficult, he managed it with the dignity that genuine personal growth, even grudging personal growth, occasionally produces. Warren, during this period, met a woman in Cimarron City. Her name was Dorothy Haynes, and she was a schoolteacher, and Warren Quinn, who had always been the quietest and most inward of the brothers, fell in love with her in the particular comprehensive way of people who have been waiting a long time for someone specific. He married her in the autumn of 1884 and brought her to the valley, and she and Winifred found each other immediately and completely. Two women who understood this landscape and each other with the kind of recognition that is rare and should be celebrated when it occurs. The valley was changing around all of them, as the frontier changed throughout the decade, as the railroad expanded and the land fills continued, and the political status of the territory moved slowly toward the statehood it would not achieve until 1912, but which was already casting its shadow forward in new legal structures and new social arrangements. Harrow's Crossing grew. New families arrived. The Barrett Quinn operation was one of the valley's established presences, spoken of with the specific respect accorded to enterprises that have been built honestly and have lasted. In the spring of 1885, Winifred rode out to the eastern boundary of her property on a clear April morning and stood at the fence line looking across the land that her father had believed in and that she had defended and built into something real and true. Edward would be 3 in the coming winter and was already demonstrating the physical confidence of a child who has grown up close to horses and open land. Clara at 14 months was mobile and opinionated and watched the world with her mother's green eyes. Dexter found her at the fence line mid-morning when he came around from the creek bottom work. He reined in beside her and they sat on their horses side by side looking out over the valley in the April light. "What are you thinking?" he asked. It was the question he asked her often. He always wanted to know what she was thinking. He had never stopped being genuinely interested in what went on inside her mind, which she had decided some time ago was one of the most significant things about him. "I am thinking that my father would be pleased," she said. "He would be overwhelmed," Dexter said. "I think he imagined something good here, but I do not think he imagined this." She looked around at the land. At the solid cabin that had become a real house, added to over 5 years until it had 3 bedrooms and a proper kitchen and a front porch where she sat in the evenings. At the corral and the stable and the garden that produced abundantly every summer. At the fence line maintained and clear. At the creek bottom land green with the season's growth. "He told me it was good land," she said. "He was right." "He was right about more than the land," Dexter said. "He was right that it would give back what you put into it. You put yourself into it completely." She looked at him. "We did," she said. "We both did." He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand, and she let him hold it, and they sat there in the April morning in the valley that they had built together, and the light was very clear, and the land stretched around them in all directions, good land, honest land, land that had been earned and defended and loved into its full potential. "Dexter," she said. "Yes. I want to expand the north pasture this summer," she said. "The grazing rotation data from last year suggests we can increase the herd by 20% without degrading the grass quality if we implement the new rotation pattern in the fourth quarter." He looked at her. She was looking at the land with the focused attention of someone planning the next chapter of a project that has no final chapter, only progression. "You have been thinking about this for weeks," he said. "Months," she said. "I wanted to have the full year of data before I proposed it." "I agree with the analysis," he said. "I also want to discuss the water access on the northern section before we commit to the expansion." "I have notes on that," she said. "I will show you tonight." "Of course you have notes," he said, and there was enormous affection in it. She turned to look at him and caught the expression on his face, and her own expression changed in response, the way it always did, softening into something that she kept for him and for their children and for no one else. "Come home for lunch," she said. "I will be there by noon," he said. She turned her horse and rode back toward the house, and he sat at the fence line for a moment and watched her go with the same quality of attention he had given to her departure on that very first day. The day she had pointed a Winchester at him and told him he was on Barrett land and to state his business. She had been everything in this valley. She had been the reason he finally understood who he was and what he believed, clearly and without apology. She had held her ground against everything that had been arranged to move her, and she had done it with the specific kind of strength that is not loud or violent but is simply absolute, the strength of someone who knows what they have earned and will not be persuaded otherwise. She worked this valley honestly, and she deserved every acre she had. He had said those words to his brothers in that smoky January room, and he had meant every syllable, and he would have said them in every room he ever stood in, to any audience that needed to hear them. The valley was theirs now. Not just hers, not just his family's. Theirs together, built honestly and held honestly and growing in the clear New Mexico light into something that would outlast them both and carry forward everything they had put into it. He turned his horse west toward the day's work with the particular satisfaction of a man who knows exactly where he is going and exactly where he will be at noon. And the April morning opened around him, bright and certain, and full of everything that was yet to come. That autumn Winifred discovered she was pregnant for the third time. She told Dexter over dinner with Edward between them in his chair and Clara on her lap, and he looked across the table at her with the same expression he had given her each time, complete and unguarded and full. "Third time," she said. "I hope you are still finding the timing exactly right." "I am finding the timing exactly right," he said, and reached across the dinner table to take her hand. Edward, who was approaching the age of language with characteristic Quinn thoroughness, looked at their joined hands and then at both their faces with an evaluative expression and said, with the decisive clarity of a 3-year-old who has reached a conclusion, "Good." "Yes," Dexter agreed. "Good." Winifred looked at her family gathered in the lamplight of the house she had built on the land her father had believed in, and felt the full weight of everything that had come together here. The hidden motive had been love from the very beginning, though neither of them had known it at the start. The secrets had been honest ones, fears and feelings held close until there was safety to release them. The forced choice had been made freely and without regret. The dark past had been Randall's methods, and the family's blind spots, and all the ways that power in a new country forgets to ask who else has a legitimate claim. And the ultimate sacrifice had been Dexter choosing what was right over what was easy, standing at that table and saying the words that changed everything. All of it had led here. To this table, this light, these children, this man who held her hand across the dinner things while their son pronounced the final verdict on their life together. Good. Yes, exactly and entirely good. In June of 1886, Winifred gave birth to their third child, another son, in the house that had once been a collapsed cabin in the Valley of Dreams. They named him Silas, because Dexter had spent a long time thinking about his father's complicated legacy, and had decided that the best response to an imperfect inheritance was to carry the name forward into something better, to let it mean what it could mean in the hands of people who had chosen honesty. Silas Quinn arrived in the summer light and was received into a family that was complete and complicated and honest, and full of the particular love that grows between people who have fought for something real and won it together. The valley held them all. The good land, as promised, gave back everything they put into it and more. And at the end of the day, when the work was done and the children were asleep, and the lamp burned low on the table where Winifred's notes and Dexter's survey maps lay side by side, they sat together on the porch of the house that was all of it at once, a dream fulfilled, and a life earned, and a love that had started at a fence line with a Winchester and a question about property rights and had become, through every difficulty and every choice, and every word spoken plainly in a valley that rewarded honest work, the truest thing in either of their lives. The stars over the Cimarron Valley were very bright on those nights. The darkness was wide and clean and uncompromised. And they sat together in it and did not need to say anything because everything had already been said, and everything that mattered was exactly where it was supposed to be.